40 years ago, on Simchat Torah of 1984, I was a child of 10 years old, and I was sitting on the floor near the Rebbe's stage as Bibi Netanyahu, the then UN ambassador, came with some other Israeli dignitaries. The Rebbe spoke to them for 45 minutes. Though I have to tell you, as a child sitting on the floor with thousands of other people crammed into the synagogue at 770, it felt like they were talking for hours. Today I'd like to touch on 3 points from the Rebbe related to what's been going on in the North. It's actually very tempting to try and share 20 points, but we'll stick to 3 for today, God willing. Both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Alan Baker told us about that conversation in Jem's My Encounter with the Rebbe project, and part of it feels especially relevant today.
I said, Rebbe, I came to see you, and he looked aside and he said, just to see, not to talk. And so we started talking, and we had a 45-minute conversation. And the people who were waiting were very, very impatient, to put it mildly, but it was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Well, he said, you're going to this house of darkness, the UN, which was very, very unfriendly to Israel at the time. And he said, even in the greatest darkness, if you light a candle, it spreads a great light that can be seen from afar. And of course, he said to remember what I represent, who I represent, to stand firmly and proudly for Israel and the Jewish people.
The discussion was between the Rebbe, Netanyahu, and myself. At that time, Prime Minister Shamir was involved in negotiations to withdraw Israeli forces from Lebanon. The question was whether Israel will withdraw or not, and here and it was still open. Ultimately, Israel withdrew, but the Rebbe was very insistent that Israel shouldn't withdraw. In fact, he said several times, "Yad chazaka uzro netuya." We should go forward, and this is a message that we should bring to Shamir, and he stressed this repeatedly as something very important. He says, look, you shouldn't withdraw. You went into Lebanon in self-defense because there was terrorism emanating from Lebanese territory, and you're also in a state of hostility with Syria, and if need be, if you have to continue going forward even into Syrian territory, then you should do it. And Israel should do it. It's Israel's right. You're protecting Eretz Israel. You're protecting Jews, Israelis, and it's very important.
Who knew how relevant this advice would be all these years later? Now, an obvious thing we can all say is, oh, if only we listened, if only. But the more important point is, today, do what you need to do with full force. Unless we stop making the same mistakes, history will, God forbid, repeat itself again. The next lesson comes from the beginning of Mivtza Litani. It was a 1978 operation to bring security to Israel's northern border. After a particularly horrific terrorist attack when the PLO commandeered a bus and massacred 30 of the passengers, on top of regularly launching rockets and artillery strikes into northern Israel, the IDF moved into Lebanon very quickly and very successfully, established a buffer zone to prevent further attacks. On Purim of that year, March 23, 1978, 8 days after the start of the operation, the Rebbe praised the way the action began, but urged Israel's government to continue doing whatever it takes to consolidate their gains and continue to assure security.
Man hat nicht gemacht in Sitzungen, man hat nicht gemacht in Vayides, in Komitetten, man hat nicht gemacht in Kriya, Rishenu, Shnei, Shlishis. Nur die, was einen Mumche beinyan sehr, wie man darf sich fühlen in Zofen von Eretz Yisrael und von dorten bis Michus Litzfeno von Eretz Yisrael, und man hat das Machlit gewähnt und auch getan, und kein Pissum und fragen dies, bei 120, was zwischen sie gefunden sich echt Netzlim und Muschlomim, und nege die, was fühlen sich, wie man sagt, sie auch von Zofen, von Moskau, wie Kayesi Base, und man hat Machlit gewähnt, und gefragt nach Wissende Kassayinen von Pikuach Nefesh, und hat das gleich auch getan und es hat Matzlier gewesen, als Tippel allein mit Mosser Facher. Mit der alle Zeus, was sich davon gewählt, und es hat sich herausgewiesen, dass der Weg a vermeiden Milchomes, wie man sagt, so schön nicht der Begolo, ja, dass der Weg, was sie mit vermeiden, auf weiter und nicht vermieten die Milchomes, was man Mehle gehabt hat, Pläne zu heranmischen und der zu heranmischen, hat man gesehen, a beshiva drochim yonussele von Echo, und so hat sich auch getan der Ingen, bis man kurzer Begisse und halbweit der Mamscher sein, was sie in der Neffen von on Pirsen, aber bejachad im Sehen meiste Befehl bis dieses Achig Dele und der Ingen beschlemusse, nicht gehen a Zadechad Leponi und danach schicken Schluchen bechol Hoelam Kule. Wo sagt der, was ist in Derby in Washington und wo sagt der, was ist in Moskau und der, was ist in London und der, was ist in Paris. Wie kann jetzt über sie merken gehen, als Schönitze nicht. Hat auch gegolten, aber sich nicht mit Jascher gewöhnt, mit Ma Jemer Habries. Ein Bruder, ein was man sich überzeigt, die Muroi. Wie gesagt, früher war 3 Mal nacheinander und noch getan denselben Teil. Und es hat gekostet Hunderte, Rachmaner, Zlam, Tausende. Korbonis, hohe Lisiim, so das Rachmachas verschollen, überchasen denselben Teil noch einmal. Und wie hier rotzen haben, es soll nicht voll werden. Für die Jiden, was sie seine Jahre, Verachale, wo mit Zazibis, Schönes und Mischunes, a viele im Kavanos und Rizuyo. Und soll Reis nehmen, Schulchen, Norach, Eirach, Chai. Und guckt und dort dem Dien.
If you want the victory to last, you must ignore outside pressures. Do what needs to be done to assure security. If you're going to wait for the world's approval, forget about it. Now, hopefully that's what we've been doing this week. But after you secure things, by going in on the ground or whatever the true security experts determine is needed, you need to be comfortable to keep ignoring those who will be screaming, politely but firmly, do what you need to do. The criticism and the pressure will come. It has come every single time in the past, and that's exactly where Israel has subsequently turned a win into a loss, including, unfortunately, in the very place the Rebbe was warning them in that talk in Lebanon. By the way, here's a clip we found of General Avigador Ben Gal, an absolute hero from his actions during the Yom Kippur War, who was later the commander of the Northern Command. He devised and oversaw Mivtza Litani.
האלוף בן גל, שלחמתי נגד הסורים ברמת הגולן.
ההצלחה רבה בהגנה על כל ארץ ישראל, והגנה גם כן על הרוחניות בארץ ישראל.
תודה רבה, כבוד הרב.
הצלחה רבה, הגנה והרוחניות.
אני מבקש לברך אותי על הצלחה בפרנסה ובריאות.
Now there's a third very important point of the Rebbe that comes to mind today. Close your eyes and jump back only a couple of weeks. What were we going to do with Lebanon? Hezbollah, 150,000 short-range, medium-range, long-range, precision-guided missiles. The situation seemed impossible. It was impossible. What in the world were we going to do? Now, if you've already forgotten the mind space we were in, Google it. The CEO of Israel's electric company said Israel's entire north will be uninhabitable. The power was going to collapse. Major damage to Israel's highways. People were going to be in their shelters for days on end, God forbid. The carnage from the salvos of thousands of well-aimed rockets was going to be massive. And look where we are today. To me, it seems there are some parallels here to the summer of 1967. It was only 20 years or so after the Holocaust, and the Jews were about to be annihilated, and there was no way around the outcome of utter devastation. And then, as the Rebbe described, in one day, everything turned around with Mivtza Moked, the IAF's attack on Egypt's Air Force, and eventually the Syrian and Jordanian Air Forces followed that, and that launched the Six-Day War, which Israel won resoundingly.
Bisher sie gewähnt noch die 6 Tage,
was demot sich alle geheißen sagen Tili, und kein Jete min a Klau, min a Kose, el a Kose, bis Gott de Freie. Doch der haben gesagt, nicht Bariches, haben gesagt, Apostel, haben geschrien, Schma Yisro. Wo das ist der Chaichocha, mod betrachtet das als Manschel Sakone, Rachmane Litzlan. Bisher ist durchgegangen die 6 Tage, mit den 6 Tagen, was noch die 6 Tage, und dann haben wir gesagt, der Chagav, als Easter hebt sich erstört. Was auf Pi, wo die Sakone Gluyo, ist durchgegangen, Bechaz Hashem, ובניס Hashem, וכולו. Als wo aber mit all sich bewohren in Kirche weizen, ja, die Osserli es Achayl Azeh. Was ist in der Regel geschehen, ob Male geschrien, Yad Hashem Osserli. Sie mehr nicht, wo da noch hat non geben, Chiluk Idee ist. Aber hat genommen und mir will ausdrucken, Becheveres und voneinander schicken. Aber dass ich Bnei Yodem auf Move getan, Kirche weizen, ja, die Osserli es Achayl Azeh, ist geblieben ein Ruach Zoffen, jeder mit Ziveris, mit Zoffen Tiposach, und da sagt mir Nadra, aber nur mir sehen, wie du sich einkennst. Und Rachmane Litzlan, sie zieht sich und sie schleppt sich, sie bechaze, Hashem Hagdelim, ist hat mir noch als, wat mir noch als, mit Zachab, Mayad Hashem, Moses ist mit Kiva Vatseif, Bemele werden sagen, a Kapitel Tilim, und mit der Robering in die Sederis, in der Meise Befehl, ist auch der, was hat ein aufgebaut, die 3 Dodim, wo das ist der Rebeste, wird sich einkehren mit Ruch zu vernichten. Sie darf sich aber sein, bei Bechira Chofschi, sie warten auf diesen Sohn, das ist klein, bei Bechira Chofschi. Und das ist nicht abschad, was wir können sich einreden, das ist ein Jini, was in der Gehe, Weberle Jan. ואני את נפשי הצלתי דפאבה דים מפסיק, das Ajinien, was Kol Yisrael Arevin ze baze. Und Bishar Sein, Nirachmane Litzlan, steht in Sakone Kipschute, wo soll sich nicht gefunden, riet das Son, die Kiyum und die Metzius von jeder Rieden, in welchen Ort in Welt soll sich nicht gefunden.
As this relates to today, while we're not out of the woods yet, it seems obvious that Israel's intelligence services, the Air Force, the IDF, have done astounding work, and we've dodged a massive bullet. But if we want to learn from history, there's something we need to be very careful with here. On dozens, if not hundreds of occasions, the Rebbe begged Israel's leaders to stay away from hubris, not to swagger and to remain humble. Hopefully, by now we've learned our lesson about where hubris and too much pride can lead us, God forbid. So the beepers, the meticulous mapping of every missile launcher in Lebanon, the incredible intelligence on the leaders of Hezbollah, and of course all of the people who are endangering in way too many cases sacrificing their lives to provide security and peace, they are real, they are true, they are necessary, and we owe every one of them a massive thank you. But it's important to understand how this has worked repeatedly over the past 75 years. When we do what Torah directs us to do to protect life and limb, we achieve miraculous outcomes. So develop the most brilliant tactics and impeccable intelligence capabilities. Enlist the finest people, the sharpest minds. And then, when we do our utmost, He crowns our work with miraculous results. May these miracles keep on coming.